The kitchen was loud and busy, full of sizzling sounds and sharp smells. Pans clanged, spoons stirred, and the heat from the stoves made the air feel heavy. Chef Bruno, the head of the restaurant, was shouting again. He'd always shouted when he was stressed, and today was a busy day. "Move faster," he barked, pointing at the younger chefs. "This is not a school. It's a real kitchen." In the middle of all the noise stood a quiet woman named Claire. She was new to the kitchen, dressed in a simple white apron and black shoes. She didn't say much, and most people thought she was just another assistant. She had been chopping vegetables for days now and had never once complained. Chef Bruno didn't like how calm she was. He believed kitchen life should make people nervous. When someone didn't panic, he thought they weren't taking the job seriously. Today, he decided to test her. "You," he said, pointing at Claire. "Come here." Claire looked up and walked over without a word. She wiped her hands on her apron and waited. "Think you can cook?" Chef Bruno asked. He didn't expect an answer. He handed her a long recipe sheet with more than 20 steps. It was a difficult dish, bouillabaisse with 3 sauces and a handmade saffron reduction. Even his best chefs struggled with it. "Make this," he said with a smirk. "You've got 1 hour." Some of the other cooks paused. A few even smiled nervously. Nobody gave that dish to a beginner. Everyone expected Claire to give up or fail badly. But Claire didn't look scared. She just took the recipe and walked over to the station. She moved slowly but surely, gathering the ingredients one by one. Her hands didn't shake, and she didn't ask for help. She read the recipe carefully, then began to work. As she sliced the vegetables, the knife moved smoothly through each piece. There were no rough cuts. She handled the fish with care and skill, as if she had done it many times before. One of the younger chefs noticed and whispered to his teammate, "She's better than she looks." Meanwhile, Chef Bruno had already forgotten about her. He was yelling about a missing order and arguing with the waiter. He had no idea what was happening behind him. The kitchen continued to buzz, but Claire worked like she was alone in a quiet room. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. And slowly, the dish began to come together, colorful, balanced, and beautiful. Nobody expected much when she started, but soon, everyone nearby was watching her. The quiet woman with the calm eyes was cooking something special, and even though no one said it out loud, they could feel it. Something was different about Claire. They just didn't know how different yet. The kitchen was filled with the usual noise, the clatter of plates, the sizzling of meat, the quick footsteps of chefs running between stations. But today, something felt different. The air was thick with curiosity. As Claire continued to cook, the staff began to notice her calm, steady movements. It was unlike anything they had ever seen in a new chef. "She's moving so smoothly," Julien, the sous chef, whispered to Marie, the pastry chef. "It's almost like she's done this before." Marie looked over at Claire. She was stirring the saffron sauce with such precision that it seemed as though each swirl had a purpose. Her hands didn't shake, and she never hesitated. The way Claire handled the knife, the fish, the vegetables, it was all effortless, as if she was preparing a dish for a Michelin-starred restaurant, not a busy kitchen filled with yelling chefs. "Maybe she worked at a fancy restaurant before," Marie suggested, "but I've never heard of her." Julien shook his head. "No, she's new here. And trust me, Chef Bruno wouldn't have hired her if she had any real experience. This is her first week, remember?" "Then how is she so good?" Marie asked, raising an eyebrow. Julien frowned. He didn't know the answer, but the more he watched Claire, the more he began to wonder. Chef Bruno had always been a bit too loud, a bit too proud of his own skills. He wasn't used to anyone doing things better than him. And Claire, she was doing everything better than expected. Even in the chaos of the kitchen, she remained calm and focused. "I think she's going to surprise everyone," Julien said softly. At the other side of the kitchen, Claire worked without looking up. She didn't notice the eyes on her or the whispers that started to spread. Her attention was only on the dish. She carefully arranged the fish on the plate, placed the perfectly made sauces beside it, and garnished it with fresh herbs. When she finished, the dish looked almost too perfect to eat. Chef Bruno, meanwhile, was arguing with the waiter. He didn't notice the progress happening behind him. The dish was nearly done, but he had no idea that Claire was the one preparing it. In his mind, she was just another assistant, someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of fine dining. But something was starting to change. The other chefs weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, waiting for Claire to make a mistake, to slip up in some way. But that didn't happen. Instead, as she finished the dish, the atmosphere in the kitchen shifted. No one dared to speak, as if they were holding their breath. In that moment, Julian looked over at Marie again and whispered, "This is going to be interesting." The clock was ticking, and Chef Bruno was still too distracted with other matters to notice. Claire had made the dish, without rushing, without stress, and without the loud, frantic energy the kitchen usually had. She had made it her own. And now, everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Claire placed the finished dish on the counter with quiet precision. The bouillabaisse, with its perfectly cooked fish, rich saffron sauce, and delicate garnishes, looked nothing like the rushed, messy versions the kitchen often produced. She stepped back, her eyes lingering on the dish for just a moment. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a reminder of her past, a past she had tried to leave behind. As Claire stood in the kitchen, the hum of activity around her slowly faded, and her mind wandered. Memories from years ago began to surface, uninvited, but strong and clear. She remembered her old restaurant in Lyon, a place where she had spent countless hours perfecting every dish, every flavor. It had been her life, a dream come true, a place where every plate was an artwork and every customer left with a smile. She could almost hear the quiet buzz of the restaurant then, the soft clinking of glasses, the gentle hum of conversations. She remembered the pride she felt when the restaurant received its first Michelin star. She remembered the long days and nights spent in the kitchen, focused only on the food, always striving to be better. But with the stars came pressure, and the pressure came with costs. Claire had worked hard to build her reputation, and soon the weight of expectations grew heavy. The quiet moments she once enjoyed were replaced with long hours and a never-ending stream of customers, critics, and staff demands. She felt herself fading from the woman she once was. The breaking point had come suddenly. A personal loss, something too painful to talk about, had forced her to walk away. She left it all behind. The restaurant, the fame, and the kitchen that had once been her home. She vanished, leaving only whispers behind. Claire shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She wasn't there anymore. She wasn't that woman. The past had no place in her life now. All she wanted was peace, a quiet life away from the spotlight. The last thing she wanted was to return to a kitchen like this, full of noise and stress. But here she was, once again standing in the kitchen, preparing a dish that brought her memories rushing back. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts, and she glanced over to see Chef Bruno walking toward her, still arguing with someone over the phone. He didn't see her yet, but Claire could feel his presence. He was the kind of man who demanded attention, and she had a feeling that once he saw her dish, he wouldn't know what hit him. For a moment, Claire felt the familiar flicker of nerves. Could she really keep up this quiet facade? Could she truly stay out of the spotlight for good? Chef Bruno was about to find out. As she stood there, waiting for him to notice the dish, Claire took a deep breath. She had walked away from her past, but maybe, just maybe, her past wasn't done with her yet. The kitchen was buzzing with activity, but the attention of the staff was shifting. Claire had finished the dish and placed it on the counter, and now the room was filled with quiet murmurs. The other chefs, who had been working nonstop just moments before, were now sneaking glances at her. Some tried to act casual, but it was clear that they were watching her closely. Chef Bruno was still deep in conversation with the waiter about an order, not noticing Claire at all. Claire, however, didn't seem bothered. She simply stood still, her eyes focused on the plate in front of her. She had done her job, and now she was waiting. Julien, the sous chef, could barely contain his curiosity. He had been working in kitchens for years, but he had never seen anyone move with the calm confidence that Claire displayed. The way she worked was like a dancer in a perfectly choreographed routine. Every movement was precise, every step calculated. She didn't rush, didn't flinch. It was almost like she knew exactly what would happen next. "She's not like anyone I've ever seen," Julien whispered to Marie, who was busy icing a cake at the far end of the kitchen. Marie glanced over at Claire, then back at Julien. "You're right," she said quietly. "She doesn't seem nervous at all. And look at that dish. It's perfect." Julien nodded. He had worked in some of the best kitchens in Paris, and he could tell when a chef had real talent. Claire had talent, the kind that made you question everything you thought you knew about cooking. She wasn't just following a recipe. She was making the dish her own, turning it into something far more impressive than what Chef Bruno had expected. As the murmurs continued, Claire felt the eyes of the kitchen staff on her. She didn't let it bother her. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. The dish was now ready for Chef Bruno to taste. He had to see it, had to notice it. But Claire wasn't worried. She had cooked for far more important people than him before, and she knew the value of letting the food speak for itself. Finally, Chef Bruno ended his phone call and turned toward the counter. He paused when he saw the plate. For a moment, he just stared at it, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't the messy, rushed version of bouillabaisse he was used to. No, this was something completely different, something far more elegant, balanced, and beautiful. "Who made this?" he demanded, his voice rising. The kitchen went silent. All eyes were on Claire, who stood calmly with her hands clasped behind her back. She didn't step forward or speak right away. She knew what was coming, but she wasn't worried. Not anymore. "I did," she said quietly, her voice firm but calm. Chef Bruno blinked, clearly surprised. He hadn't expected her to answer so confidently. His eyes flickered between her and the dish, trying to make sense of it. "You?" he asked, as if he couldn't believe it. "You're the one who made this?" "Yes," Claire replied, her gaze steady. "I followed the recipe, but I also made a few changes." The staff in the kitchen exchanged looks. They had heard rumors of Claire's background, but no one had expected her to be this good. Chef Bruno, however, was still struggling to believe it. After a long moment, he finally took a bite of the dish. The silence in the kitchen stretched on. As he chewed, his expression shifted from surprise to something else, something closer to admiration. Chef Bruno wasn't used to admitting mistakes, but this time, he couldn't deny it. This is excellent," he said, his voice quieter now. Claire just nodded, not saying another word. The kitchen staff, though, was in awe. They had just witnessed something no one could have predicted. The room was quiet, and the tension in the kitchen was almost too much to handle. Chef Bruno had taken a bite of the dish, and now every eye in the kitchen was on him. Claire stood with her hands behind her back, waiting. She didn't need to say anything. She knew the dish would speak for itself. Chef Bruno chewed slowly, his eyes narrowing as the flavors hit him. The bouillabaisse, which was supposed to be a complicated mix of fish and spices, was perfect. The fish was tender, the sauce was rich, and the saffron reduction was smooth and full of depth. It was a dish he knew well, but Claire had made it better. Much better. He took another bite. This time, he didn't try to hide his reaction. The flavors were exactly right, yet something about them felt new, fresh, and different. The spices were balanced perfectly, and the fish, which was often hard to cook just right, had been cooked to perfection. Chef Bruno had always prided himself on his ability to make the perfect bouillabaisse. He had spent years perfecting the dish, making sure it stood out in his restaurant. But this was something else. He couldn't figure out how Claire had done it, but he knew one thing for sure. She had done it in a way he had never thought of. The silence in the kitchen stretched on. The other chefs stood still, holding their breath, waiting for Chef Bruno to speak. Julian, the sous chef, couldn't stop himself from whispering to Marie, "I told you, she's incredible." Marie nodded, her eyes wide with surprise. "This is unbelievable. She's not just a good cook, she's a genius." Finally, Chef Bruno set the fork down, his hand shaking slightly. He cleared his throat and looked at Claire, who was still standing calmly by the counter. This is amazing," Chef Bruno said, his voice softer now. There was a note of respect in his tone that had not been there before. "How did you do it?" Claire shrugged slightly, not wanting to brag. "I just followed the recipe, but I made a few adjustments along the way. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts." Chef Bruno blinked, clearly trying to understand what he had just heard. "Instincts," he repeated, looking down at the plate. "You didn't follow my recipe exactly." Claire shook her head. "No, the dish has potential. You just have to know how to bring it out." Chef Bruno was quiet for a moment, staring at the plate. It was clear he was struggling with the fact that a new, unknown chef had just made something better than he had ever made. He had always been the best in his kitchen, but Claire had just shown him something new. "Who are you?" Chef Bruno asked, his voice quieter now, a mix of curiosity and awe. Claire didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, then at the other chefs, who were now waiting for her response. Her mind flickered to her past, her old life, the years she spent running a restaurant and earning Michelin stars. But that wasn't who she was now. She had walked away from that life, and she didn't want to go back. "Just someone who used to cook," Claire replied with a small smile. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. It was the truth she wanted to share. Chef Bruno didn't press her for more. He nodded slowly, still digesting both the dish and the person who had made it. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something to learn. And that was a strange feeling for a chef who had always been at the top. "Well," Chef Bruno said after a long pause, "you're going to fit in here just fine." After the taste test, the kitchen began to return to its usual rhythm. The other chefs went back to their stations, but the mood had shifted. There was a new sense of respect in the air, especially toward Claire. Whispers of admiration and curiosity buzzed quietly among the staff. No one had expected her to be so skilled, and no one had expected Chef Bruno to react the way he had. Claire, however, didn't let it get to her head. She returned to chopping vegetables, her movements steady and focused, just as they had been before. She didn't need the praise or the attention. She just wanted to cook, to do what she was good at, and to remain unnoticed. Chef Bruno, on the other hand, was still processing what had happened. He walked around the kitchen, his mind racing. He had tasted the dish, and he knew it was something special. Claire had taken a simple recipe and turned it into something extraordinary. He hadn't been able to figure out how she did it, and that bothered him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he approached Claire again. She was at her station, slicing carrots with the same calm, quiet focus that had impressed him earlier. "You're good," Chef Bruno said, his voice a bit softer than usual. "Really good." Claire looked up for a moment, offering a small, respectful nod. She didn't need to say anything. Her cooking had already spoken for her. "I've seen a lot of chefs in my time," Chef Bruno continued, walking a bit closer. "But you're different. I don't know where you came from, but you clearly know what you're doing." Claire didn't answer at first. She kept chopping, her knife making quick, sharp sounds as it cut through the carrots. But then she looked up again, meeting his gaze. "I came from a place where food meant everything," she said quietly, her voice steady but distant. "It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it." Chef Bruno raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her words. "And now?" "Now I'm just here to cook," Claire said simply. "I don't need the spotlight. I don't need recognition. I just want to make food that makes people happy." Chef Bruno nodded slowly. He could tell there was a lot more to Claire's story than she was willing to share, but he also knew that the kitchen was the best place for her. She didn't need to talk about her past. Her skills spoke loud enough. Over the next few days, Claire settled into the rhythm of the kitchen. She wasn't loud or flashy. She didn't try to take charge or draw attention to herself. Instead, she let her cooking do the talking. She worked alongside the others, quietly helping when needed, but always focusing on the food. The rest of the kitchen staff began to look at her with new eyes. They realized that she wasn't just a quiet assistant. She was a talented chef who could hold her own in the most high-pressure situations. Slowly, the staff warmed up to her, respecting her not only for her skills, but also for the humility she showed every day. Claire knew she had found something important here. It wasn't fame. It wasn't recognition, but it was something real. A place where she could just cook, without the weight of expectations, and without anyone trying to make her something she wasn't. It was a fresh start, and for Claire, that was enough. A few weeks passed, and Claire continued to settle into the kitchen. The other chefs had come to respect her, not just for her skill in cooking, but for the way she kept her head down and worked quietly. She didn't seek out praise, and she didn't try to prove herself to anyone. Instead, she let her cooking speak for itself. But Chef Bruno, despite his admiration for Claire, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had seen great chefs come and go, but there was something different about Claire. He had witnessed her make complicated dishes without breaking a sweat, and he had seen how the staff quietly respected her, even though she was still new to the team. It made him uneasy, even though he didn't want to admit it. One evening, as the dinner rush started to die down, Chef Bruno approached Claire. She was cleaning her station, as always, after finishing her last dish. "Claire," he said, his voice firm, "I've been thinking." Claire paused, glancing up at him. "About what?" "About you," Chef Bruno replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're good, really good, but I've seen it before. There's more to you than just following the rules. I know you're hiding something." Claire didn't flinch. She kept her eyes steady on him, and her hands continued to clean the station. "I'm not hiding anything." Chef Bruno shook his head. "I'm not talking about your past, Claire. I don't need to know where you came from or what you've done. I'm talking about your potential. You're holding back. I know it, and I'm not the only one who sees it." Claire stayed quiet for a moment, considering his words. She had heard this before. The pressure, the expectations, the idea that she should push herself further than she wanted. But she wasn't interested in any of that anymore. All she wanted was to cook, to do her job, and to stay out of the spotlight. "I'm not interested in proving myself to anyone," Claire finally said. Her voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it. "I just want to do my job." Chef Bruno studied her for a moment, his expression serious. "I get it. I do. But I think you're capable of more than this. I want to see what you can really do. I'm giving you a challenge, Claire." Claire raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of challenge?" The next dinner service, Chef Bruno said, his tone even, "I want you to create a dish of your own, something that showcases everything you're capable of. No guidelines, no rules, just you, the ingredients, and your skills. I'll be watching, and the rest of the team will be watching too." The challenge hung in the air, thick with the weight of expectations. Claire felt the pressure building, but she didn't feel nervous. She was calm, steady, just like always. This was what she was good at, cooking, not competing. "All right," Claire said quietly. "I'll do it." Chef Bruno nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do when you're not holding back." As he walked away, Claire stood still for a moment thinking. She wasn't worried about the challenge itself. She knew what she could do. But now, it wasn't just about cooking. It was about something deeper, about proving, not to anyone else, but to herself, that she still had what it took. The next dinner service would be her chance to show the kitchen, and maybe even herself, that she could still push beyond what she had become. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. This was a test she had to take. The night of the dinner service arrived, and the kitchen was filled with a buzz of excitement and tension. The staff had gathered around their stations, prepping ingredients, checking their stations, and getting ready for the busy night ahead. Chef Bruno stood at the front, overseeing everything, but his eyes kept flicking toward Claire. She was focused, moving quietly around the kitchen, gathering the ingredients she would need for the dish she had promised to create. Claire didn't feel the nerves that the others might have expected. She wasn't worried about the challenge. She had cooked for years in kitchens all around the world, and this, in the end, was just another service. She knew what she was capable of, and tonight, she was going to prove it. Not to anyone else, but to herself. Chef Bruno walked over to Claire's station and stood there for a moment, watching her work. She was calm, just like always, as she prepared the ingredients. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. She didn't need to. "Remember, Claire," Chef Bruno said, his voice low but firm. "This is your moment. Don't hold back." Claire nodded once, not needing any further encouragement. She already knew what she had to do. As the dinner service began, the kitchen started to get busy. The orders came in quickly, and the pressure started to mount. Chefs worked at a rapid pace, chopping, sauteing, and plating as the orders piled up. But Claire remained calm, even as the intensity of the service increased. She moved with purpose, her hands steady and sure. When the time came for her dish, Claire started to put it together. She carefully arranged each element on the plate. Her mind focused on making everything perfect. There was no room for mistakes. She had decided to make a delicate fish dish with the citrus sauce and a side of roasted vegetables, something light but bursting with flavor. She wanted the dish to be simple but elegant, something that would show off her skills without being overly complicated. Chef Bruno watched as Claire worked. He had seen many chefs falter under pressure, but Claire was different. She moved with ease, her concentration never wavering. When she finally finished the dish, she looked at it for a moment, ensuring every detail was in place before sending it up. "Table 5, Claire said calmly, passing the dish to the waiter. The staff gathered around, waiting for Chef Bruno's reaction. Chef Bruno took the first bite of the dish. His expression was unreadable at first, but then, as the flavors hit him, he allowed himself a moment of surprise. The fish was perfectly cooked, the citrus sauce bright and tangy, and the vegetables roasted just right. It was simple, but the flavors were layered and balanced in a way that he hadn't expected. He looked at Claire, who was standing quietly by her station, waiting. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at the dish again. Then, with a small nod of approval, he turned to her. "This is exactly what I wanted to see," Chef Bruno said, his voice soft but genuine. "You've proven you're capable of more than just following the rules. This is your dish, Claire. It's yours." Claire didn't smile, but there was a sense of quiet pride in her eyes. She had done it. Not for the applause, not for the recognition, but because she knew she was still a chef who could create something great. As the service continued, the kitchen settled into a steady rhythm. Claire moved through the night with ease, handling the pressure as if it was just another day. But deep down, she knew something had changed. This wasn't just another night. It was the night she had proven to herself that she still had what it took. By the end of the evening, Chef Bruno walked up to Claire, a small smile on his face. "You did good," he said simply. "Very good." Claire nodded, her expression calm. The challenge was over, and she had passed it. She didn't need more validation. She had already found what she was looking for, peace and the joy of cooking once again.